I am the e-board treasurer of New York Black Library Caucus, and I'm here today with Andrew Sekou Jackson as part of an ongoing series that we are doing called In Our Own Words. Today, we are very lucky to have this amazing person here with us today, and also being honored at the NYLA breakfast for our anniversary on behalf of all the amazing people that have been part of the community within New York State and within the United States on behalf of Black Librarianship. So let's give a quick background to this outstanding man. Andrew Sekou Jackson, also known as Andrew P. Jackson, has been a respected librarian, educator, Vietnam veteran, and cultural advocate based in New York. Raised in East Elmhurst, Queens, he began his professional journey in the U.S. Air Force, where he served with distinction and was awarded the Bronze Star. After his military service, he earned a degree in business administration from York College and later a master's in library science from Queens College. Jackson went to lead the Langston Hughes Community Library and Cultural Center in Queens for over 3 decades, where he pioneered programs that integrated Black history, community outreach, and cultural literacy. As Director-Emeritus, I will say that wrong and edit it, he remains deeply involved in mentoring, publishing, and teaching, particularly in Black Studies and library science at CUNY institutions. A former president of the Black Caucus of the American Library Association, Jackson is known nationally for his advocacy for Black librarianship and cultural representation in libraries. He has co-edited major works like the 21st Century Black Librarian in America and the Handbook of Black Librarianship, and continues to receive recognition for the lasting impact on the profession and the community he serves. Welcome, and we are privileged to have you here today.
Good to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, such a pleasure. So we have a few questions that we just like to get through that kind of really highlight and capture the level and the longevity of the leadership that you've offered to Black librarianship in the United States. So the first question is, your leadership at Langston Hughes Library was transformative. What values guided your approach to making the library a true cultural center for the community? You can even go into a general timeline of how you met that institution and how you shaped it to the one that we know today.
Well, first thing, I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that I began my career in librarianship as a non-librarian. I accepted the position at Langston Hughes Community Library and Culture Center in 1980 as assistant supervisor, they called it at that time, and was still working on my undergraduate degree. Went back and completed my graduate degree. So my approach to the library was as almost like an outsider, as a manager and an administrator, but not as a librarian. Respecting the roles that the librarians played there. The original supervisor, who I replaced when she went on family leave, was a distinguished librarian, Charlene Gadsden. I learned a lot from her, and also from the cultural arts director, Marion Glenn Straw. And since Langston Hughes was created as a non-traditional institution, I approached it as my position and my work, not just as a manager, but as a guiding leader of a cultural institution and not just the library itself. Library, homework assistance program, and the cultural arts program, and excuse me, I'm still fighting a cold. And the focus of the library was the Black Heritage Reference Center that was designed to serve not just Corona East Elmhurst, but the borough of Queens. So it had a very unique position and role within the Queens library system. When Marion left to take a position as the director of a Black Heritage Museum in Westchester County, she said, Andrew, I want you to keep one thing in mind while you're managing the library, and that is, it's not just a library, it's a cultural institution, and that's the way you should look at it. And from that day forward, I always looked at it for the whole totality of what Langston Hughes was, and not just the library, the role it played in the community, the role it played in the borough, the collections that are provided, but also the programs and services that we offered to the community as a Black heritage cultural institution. Um, as time went on and I became a librarian, one of the main uh, learning tools that I gained over time, and I've developed a curriculum based on this over time as well, and used it in my coursework at Queens College, was the concept of quality customer service. That everybody has a place in the library, everybody has a mission on the team that is at the library, and that it is not just a librarian. I'm sorry. It's not
Okay,
just a
take your time.
library. It's not just a librarian, but everybody's position, whether it's the tutor or the volunteer or the part-time employee or the custodian or the librarian or the support staff, all of us have a role in that team. And each member of the team is as important to the mission of the library and maybe more so than the director. And I've always worked that way. So every staff meeting we had, there was always discussions about quality customer service, um, the way the library looks, the way we greet the customers, the way we support ourselves, the way we enhance the mission of the library, the way we present the library is all about customer service. And everything that I've done over the years is what I call through the lens of customer service. So everything we do, no matter what it is, it's through customer service. If you put the customer first, then you are presenting the library because the customer has a role in that as well. I call them the external customers. We are the
Mm-hmm.
internal customers at the library. And that whole teamwork, everybody with the cultural program, the tutoring program, the tutors, everybody had a role in that mission at the library. So it was not just a library, but a cultural institution. And the work that we did over the years, for the 36 years I was there, and even now, is to provide quality service for the community at large. And again, it's not just CUNY East Elmhurst, but the borough of Queens. And the outreach of that, because of all of the people who came to the library for the kinds of activities who came from the outer boroughs and even outside the city, was the impact of what we created as an institution. And I think one of the greatest uh, uh, rewards of that service, not just for me, but before I got there, Tyrone Bryant was the original director. And when he left to go down to Broward County, five other branches in the Broward County library system were modeled after Langston Hughes Library. The African American Research Library Culture Center in Fort Lauderdale, part of that concept comes from the foundation of what Langston Hughes was and is. So it can be replicated in all settings and all types of libraries because you're always put in the community and have the community having a voice. One of the main differences at Langston Hughes was not only that I didn't have to be a librarian to be director, but that it was founded by the community. It was managed by the community for 18 years before it folded in and became a branch of the Queens Library. It was a federally funded special project under LSCA funding. So the
Mm-hmm.
voice of the community was always part of what we did. That board, that Library Action Committee of CUNY East Elmhurst, managed the library as an oversight with the director reporting to the board and then the Queens Library. So I was always connected to the community. And one of the joys that I've had for the 36 years I've been at Langston Hughes was the fact that I lived in the community. It was my home community, and no matter how late I was there, no matter what I did, I was doing it for my community. Queens was my community. CUNY East Elmhurst was my community.
That's a really beautiful story and sentiment. I mean, I think there are a lot of librarians and a lot of libraries where you come to work and then leave that work and go home. And I think what you've just like beautifully demonstrated is that home is the library. And for an entire community, it's centered on that before it was acquired by Queens. But I think that, seeing and viewing every person of the community, including the librarians themselves, as equal stakeholders to investing time and ethical practice into an institution such as that really says a lot about the amount of care that you and so many before you gave. So
And,
that's
and, and one
that's beautiful.
what I also tried to relate to my students is if you do not come from that community, if that's not your home community, you spend more time there than you probably do at home. So it
Mhm.
becomes your second home. And you
Mhm.
need to treat it as if you belong there, the customers belong there, and that there's a symmetry between you and the customers.
No, thank you. Really well put. Um, so just shifting gears for a minute, how did your experience, in your opinion, as a Vietnam War veteran shape your approach in this way to perhaps like customer service, as you've called it, mentorship, and just general library outreach?
I always have to take a pause when I think of Vietnam for a lot of different reasons. Um, Vietnam was a my introduction to adulthood. I when I joined the Air Force right after high school. Wasn't ready to work. Wasn't ready to go to school. I knew I was going to be drafted. And my dad asked me to go around to the different recruiters and talk to each of them, find out which one would be the best for me after military service and what would it offer me afterward.
Mhm.
Um, and in the last vein, I thought the Air Force offered that. Um, I was in administration. I wasn't didn't fly a plane as most people think people in the Air Force do.
Mhm.
Wasn't on the flight line, but I was in a war zone in an air commando squadron, and
Wow.
actually flew some missions to understand what it was to go through some of the things that some of the men that I had to write up the award documentation for actually went through.
Mhm.
Excuse me.
Okay.
So one of the things I learned there again was teamwork, responsibility. Um, be responsible for the workload that you have. We were always short-staffed. I actually, for each of the bases that I attend was stationed at, I actually was responsible for work that was above my position because we didn't have anybody else to do the work. My thinking was, I'm going to be in Vietnam for a year or more. Um, what else do I have to do? So a lot of the work I did was actually catching up on the backload of the work that was already in place that had been sitting in some cases for months and months. So I caught up on all that backload in a fairly short period of time. I know the commander and the first sergeant would come in and say, "Why are you here?" I said, "Why shouldn't I be here? What else do I have to do?" So I caught up in a lot of work, and I was responsible, and I had something that I actually felt that I gained from my father was a really strong work ethic. And I was very clear about if I'm going to be responsible for this, if my name is going to be on this, and it needs to be the best it can be in quality work. So I guess
Mhm.
that's part of that quality customer service concept where it comes from. Um, but the other thing that I gained from my military service was, in addition to being responsible, really responsible, was to challenge things that I didn't think I could do,
Mhm.
and discipline, probably more so than anything else was discipline.
Mhm.
And I brought that home with me when I worked for the city of New York before I started at Langston Hughes in the human resources. Um, when I left there, went out to California, worked at the automobile dealership, and learned about and that's where I really learned about customer service was actually at the dealership. You're not
Mhm.
going to buy a car from somebody that you don't like or you don't get along with. So customer service was embedded in the work ethic that we gained at that dealership. And I think Mr. Larry Robinson, the owner of the dealership, who managed the weekly staff meetings with all the guys on the front line about what
Mhm.
customer service was. So I
Mhm.
brought that home with me when I started at Langston Hughes. Um, the first thing I needed to do was to uh, find a way to get the staff to accept this non-librarian, non-degreed person as the manager. And I had some issues with some librarians that felt that they was improper for me to be there. But I think my style, my mannerism, my personality, eventually won most of them over. One of them left, went to another library. Years later, she came back and told me how she proud of what work I had done at the library. So I felt that my work spoke for me. I
Mhm.
didn't hope I didn't ask anybody to do something that I wouldn't do. And I learned from my librarians. I learned from my pages. I learned from the support staff. And I really had to understand what librarianship was all about. And the connection with the Black heritage came from the courses that I took in Black history at York College. And working at Langston Hughes Library with the Black Heritage Collection there, I actually came to Langston Hughes on weekends and Sundays and did my research at the library, my library, and not Queen's
Um,
Library or York College or the public library, but Langston Hughes Library. So it gave me the linkage into what how important that library and the collections were there. And then the programs and services. My introduced to African culture came through working at Langston Hughes Library. So I always see the life that I've had as a path that was set out for me by the creator. And I was just smart enough to follow that path to where it is today. Um, so working at the library and my role in Vietnam was to supervise, to manage, to support, to encourage, and to mentor all of the staff. And I learned from, like I said, I learned from them as much as they did learn from me. And that although so much of the credit of what Langston Hughes is goes to me as the director, that would never have happened if it had not been for the congenial staff that I had, and even some of them are still there, and people still look at me as part of that foundation of what the library is. But it's just something that was part of the way I manage and the way I teach and the way I learn. Um, I'm just that's just the way Andrew is, and so here I am.
yes, thank you. And I mean, you can really just see the connection through each part or each chapter of your experience in leadership, kind of grounding the ethical way that you approach leadership as teamwork instead of as one person, let's say, asking others to be led. So thank you for clarifying that story or that part of the story for you. You co-edited the Handbook of Black Librarianship, the third edition, which we are all very thankful in this world to have and to read. What major themes or changes did this edition reflect compared to its predecessors or to your experience in um, editing the handbook in total?
Well, we took it had been almost at least 20 years since the second edition that EJ put out. So there was a lot that has happened in the profession, and that's one of the reasons why the publisher selected this book to edit before the one that I proposed him initially. And I'm glad that he did. So at Foresight, thank you to Charles Hammond for that. Um, all the accomplishments, all the contributions, all the challenges, all the issues that are still in place from the first edition in 1977 to this one, to the second edition to this edition. There's some issues with racism that's still a part of what we deal with in the profession. So our role with Marvin Deloche, who was the co-editor of the second edition with EJ, Michelle Fenton, who has all the technology skills that we needed and the finesse is a great worker, library worker and librarian, and myself. Everything we did was a unified decision. There was no one decision because this was my project. If we didn't agree on it, it didn't get done. Excuse me. So we wanted to cover all the themes and all the changes and all the scope and breadth of what has changed since the second edition and make that the third edition. I think that's why we didn't realize how big it was going to be when it was finally published. But
Mhm.
we tried to cover every scope and every breadth of it. There are members of boards of trustees who have a role in there, people from the community who are non-librarians but spoke about their role with libraries and of libraries. There are retirees. There are libraries in every scope of the profession we could see deal with the technology changes. Trying to think of what else have we covered in there. Anything that we could think of, we incorporated in there, and we were fortunate to have every area that we wanted to get covered with at least two or three additions to the library. I thought it was important from my retirement and then my appointment as a member of the board of trustees of Queens Library, the first librarian, the first former staff person on the board of trustees. I felt that it was important to have a voice from trustees on that in the handbook as well.
Mhm.
Um, as a retiree, I felt that it was important to have people who are retired from the profession that can speak about what it was like when they were in the profession, the things that they felt are important, some of the things that they still hold are necessary to discuss at this late age. And everything we did was to stand on the shoulders of EJ and the other editors of the book, but also to make EJ proud of what this edition was. We wouldn't want it, definitely didn't want anything to come out in this book that we didn't feel EJ Josie would be proud of, because this was his foundational work and his legacy through Black librarianship. And I think that's where we stand with the book and how it's been received, and the role that it plays. To even today, it still plays an important role in the profession.
Thank you. And I think you bring up a really important piece that I've personally heard you speak to in the um, Handbook of Black Librarianship, like ongoing Zoom series we've had on Fridays. But I think the question that I have in relation to what you've just said is if you could kind of go over your relationship and meeting EJ Josie, the experience of getting to know him advocating for you, and him leading you to the path of advocacy that you've brought many librarians towards and with.
Thank you. Thank you for asking that question. I met EJ at Langston Hughes. EJ was one of the, even though he worked in Albany, he was very active with the librarians all over New York City with the New York Black Librarians Caucus, which was the first caucus founded after EJ founded the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. And they were librarians of every area of the profession. Um, but EJ always came to me as somebody that you just ingratiated yourself to. He encouraged you. He wanted being a mentor. When he found that I wasn't a librarian, he encouraged me to go ahead and finish that undergraduate degree because we have work for you to do. We want you to become a librarian. And he even encouraged me to apply to the program he had at the University of Pennsylvania, but I wasn't ready to leave New York
Sure.
for 2 years, and my work at Langston Hughes was more important. So he said, "Well, Queens College is a good institution. Go there, do your work there." And he would ask me about my coursework. He would ask me about my courses, and he would pop in the library almost at any time and just to see what was going on. And there were a lot of different meetings of the New York Black Caucus in Manhattan and Brooklyn and Queens. So he was fairly regular at the library. But he also always served as an example, particularly because the profession is women oriented and
Sure.
women dominated. EJ and a number of the Black male librarians that I met were always role models for what Black male librarians should be like. Excuse me. Um, so over the years, through the time when he passed away in 2009, EJ was always a mentor. He got me involved in writing. He created a publication called The Bookmark out of the state education library. In the 1985, asked me to write an article about literacy. And he loved the approach that I took, that libraries have two different, at the Langston Hughes Library had two different roles. One as a library and to help people become literate, period, in reading and books and knowledge and every source of untraditional sources, non-traditional sources that we use to encourage people to read. And then the other side of that sword was learning Black history and Black culture. And that Langston Hughes was a double-edged sword fighting illiteracy, and he loved that approach. Um, and he came back to me several years later and said, I have a project that I just can't complete. I'm in the middle of too many things. I'd like you to do it. And that was to write the forward to the ninth edition of the African American Almanac. And I said, but I'm not a writer. He says, I know. Just send me a draft in a couple of weeks. And that was EJ's thing. He would never accept no. And I fulfilled the project. They published it. It's in the ninth edition, but I never thought it was complete because I saw other uh, forwards that were very short, and uh, it just wasn't complete. And ironically, the publisher and editor came back to me years later and said, "We like what you started writing in the ninth edition. Would you write the forward to the 10th edition?" So I actually have wrote the forward to two of the editions of the African American Almanac, the ninth and 10th edition. And that one I put my whole heart and soul into, and I think it's one of my best published works. And from there, I came up with the idea. I wrote a chapter for the second edition of the handbook, and then came up with my own idea of the 21st century Black librarian. I'd written other articles and other essays
Wow.
in other publications about Black history and things. But the librarianship are the ones that I had the most passion about in terms of
Mhm.
exposure to the general public, um, a voice in the
Yeah.
profession as both a non-traditional librarian and as a manager of what librarianship should be like, what it could be like, and then of course the voice about customer service as well. So EJ was a
Right.
major force in what I did. I think the second part of that has to be attending the first National Conference of African American Librarians in 1992.
Wow.
I would always encourage my librarians to go to library conferences. This is your profession. You should go. We'll support you. We'll provide funding to help you go to conferences. But that one, it was the first national conference. I said I need to be there, and I
Mhm.
attended that. That changed my life in the profession because I was exposed to a cadre of Black male librarians from around the profession who just resonated with me in their professionalism, the way the conference was held. And it also introduced me to Dr. Inabari Zulu, who wrote the essay about the origins of librarianship going back to ancient Egypt. And this happened right before I started graduate school. So when
Mhm.
I read that and I talked to Dr. Zulu about this essay, and I still have copies of it that I use today, it reminded me of our role in this profession and that this is not taught in the schools. Ironically, that first introductory class, the person is each introducing us to the history of libraries. There's nothing about ancient Egypt. There's nothing about Black history or Black culture in there. So I said, wait a minute. I just went to a conference and I told her about she didn't know what I was talking about. So I gave her a copy of the dissertation and she didn't know what to say. So it reminded me that we're taught a single story about the profession that does not include us.
Yes.
And that when I teach, I always incorporated information about librarians, Black librarians, historical Black librarians, cultural, current Black librarians, the contributions, the challenges of what it takes to be a really responsive librarian in any community. And that this is our contribution to a profession that we've decided to be a profession in, professional in.
No, sure. I mean, I thank you for that answer. And I think um, the fact that in many ways it sounds like EJ Josie gave you the privilege of having your first written voice and you've used that voice ever since really says a lot about the power of mentorship generationally, what it means to have someone help you through the door, show you that even a door exists. And, I think for many of us as Black librarians in 2025, still meeting master's programs in pedagogy that has no story about us in it seems timely and still very much relevant. So I
Yeah,
appreciate the fact
yeah.
that this is an ongoing struggle and continues to be.
Yeah, and I think the other example EJ always said was being a role model for how to navigate very
Mm-hmm.
difficult circumstances with diplomacy.
Mm.
I've never really navigated it completely, but I always one of the things I always is they say count to 10 before you speak. I have to
Mm-hmm.
count to 25 because sometimes I speak exactly what I'm thinking. Not
Mm-hmm.
always the best approach. EJ was a master at that, and so listening to him, learning from him, watching him always gave me another method. And when things would come up, he would sit down and talk to me. So, well, look at it this way, approach it that way, think about it through another lens. And those are the kind of things I learned from EJ as well, how to be a more proactive advocate and be able to accomplish a lot more with honey than you can with vinegar.
Sure, sure. I mean, I think that's not unique to your experience, but I think it says so much about what it means to be angry at a system and at a way that, a community is treated and still say it in the kindest of words that gets the message across. And I think there are people that are expertly skilled at such a language, and for the rest of us, here we are. So yeah,
Still a work in
yeah,
progress. That's still a
yeah,
work in progress.
absolutely. All right, we have a few questions left. So your work reflects, I mean, you've kind of spoken this to a certain extent, but your work like really reflects a powerful kind of talent of like looking at libraries as tools for liberation. Can you speak a moment from like where this belief was tested or equally affirmed?
I think of all the questions you've asked, that's the most difficult.
Yes.
I think one, if there's the first challenge that I was faced, it was being accepted in the
Mhm.
profession as a manager and leader in the profession as a non-librarian, but not necessarily non-librarian because only one of the other directors had been a librarian, but as the director of a library without even a college degree. And nobody realized that I had already completed half my degree in business. So I was majoring in business. And I felt that what I needed to do was use the tools of a business that
Mhm.
I'd learned at Baruch College and then I've completed at York College, put those tools into practice and apply them as foundational tools to manage. And then the other
Mhm.
part of it was the human resources, the human source, the human element, and the personality that I had to encourage them to let me let me let me try. If I do something wrong, teach me because I'm a student and a leader at the same time, and I will learn from you the things that I don't do necessarily correctly, but I have my own style. And I think over time, my staff appreciated what I did, appreciated how I managed them. I respected them, and that's one thing that was always there. My respect for the work that they did, my
Mhm.
respect for the contribution they made to the library, my respect for the role that they played in that team that managed Langston Hughes Library over the 36 years.
Mhm. I know. So just for anyone who's watching, it's been raining for days, and most of us have colds at this point in time. So
and
enjoy.
and the, and the weather change from the summer right into this fall weather just caught me off guard.
Yes,
So
and that's a great point that I will definitely do for the next recording. Today is Tuesday, October 14th, 2025. And now we all know that. So I will say that at the beginning for the next one. Um, so I guess you said something as an example of being affirmed, perhaps, but can you, or if you want to, kind of go into an example of when it was tested, when counting to 20 or 25 wasn't really available for you, and how you navigated that experience?
yeah, I think that when I flash back, I think of once I was accepted at Langston Hughes, and the board knew me as a child. They watched me grow up, so they were really comfortable with me being there. But the other major challenge was Queen's Library accepting me as the head of Langston Hughes Library.
Mhm.
Um, a library institution, libraries manage the libraries. All of them have at least one or two degrees. Some of them have two masters. Some of them have PhDs. And then you get this kid who comes in there with no degree and is heading up the library. Now he's going to call himself a library director, So um,
Right. Sure.
that I think that was the other part, including the director of the library at that time, who just felt that this was not a good choice. Over time, I would go to meetings. I remember this visually. I would go to library director meetings, and a lot of the things that they were talking about, because they didn't realize I had so much background as a manager and as a student of management. So they would talk about all the things that libraries were doing, and I would say, "Well, Langston Hughes does that." And we were doing non-traditional things. We were using comic books to introduce kids to read. We were doing the arts. We were doing cultural programs. We were using Black history to encourage people to read. And you could hear the rumbling when I would talk about what we were doing at Langston Hughes, and the thread through most of those comments was, "Well, it's
Mhm.
not a real library.
Mhm.
That's a community place. It's not a real library." So my comment was, "What do you call a real library? We've got kids reading. We have kids coming into the homework program, getting help with their program. We got jobs for young people in the community. We provide library service. We have the Black Heritage Collection for the borough. We have a full cultural arts program. Why isn't that considered a library? It's not just a
Mhm.
library, it's a cultural institution. So they just couldn't accept that. And that was part of the transition from libraries being places where books were on shelves to where people would come into the library for concerts and lectures and panels and art exhibits and film festivals. We were doing all of that. So over time, the libraries have become examples of what Langston Hughes was from the beginning. And I love watching that transition take place. Maybe 15, 20 years ago, Queens Library started to change all the names of the libraries from the Regal Park Library, East Elmhurst Library, to East Elmhurst Community Library, Regal Park Community Library. We're the only one that didn't have to change our name. We were always a community library. And each of those libraries, collections, and services and programs focused on the cultures of that particular community. So the example of being integral part of the community comes out of Langston Hughes Library. And around the country, libraries have more changed. But when you go back to the origins, a lot of those things, a lot of the origins of many of those changes comes from the non-traditional approach to library science that we had. We would get kids coming into the library that couldn't figure out the Dewey Decimal System, like I couldn't. We created a color coding system. So it's easy to go to the green section, go to the purple section, go to the blue section.
No,
And
it's
while I was there, we changed over to just using the Dewey Decimal System because we had this color coding system for almost 25 years. So I think it was time to slowly change and just use the no problem. Everybody was so used to finding things, they would learn the numbers and they would be able to use the library just as efficiently as if it was a color coding system. So those are some of the things that we did, but some of the challenges. The rest of it came out of the example that I set and the success of the libraries that we had. We may not have had the best circulation, but we were always one of the highest in attendance. Community coming to meetings, coming to programs, coming to the attendance at the homework program. Our attendance and our people coming into the library was always near the top.
yeah.
So that was always something that we were always proud of. People use the library. Why do they use the library? Because the way people are treated when they come to Langston Hughes, the services that they're provided with, and the scope of services that they get when they come to Langston Hughes Library, they couldn't get in any other library. So we set a model for that.
No, sure. I mean, I think even generationally, the idea of a library being a place for books and for silence has very much kind of perpetuated a style and type of librarianship that mirrored and matched that ideology. And I think what you've just expressed is that there were community centers that had libraries in them. And I
Right.
think that's a really beautiful sentiment, and
Yeah.
one that I think that information science is um, gaining more and more ground on, and
Yeah.
still equally has a lot of work to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would say to that question, what challenges, if you had any, did you face in managing a culturally specific library within a larger public system like Queen's Library, or interacting with that parallel structure?
Yeah. I think that my previous answer really answers that the respect, the acceptance, um, the willingness to learn. Um, I may not have always followed all the rules. I used to get written up every week by the regional manager because I didn't come to him to get his permission to do what I felt was my job. I worked in human resources for 8 years. I wrote job descriptions. I supervised, I managed, I evaluated. So if I'm accepting this job as the director of the library, then I don't need your permission to do my job. And that's the way I felt. I don't need your permission to do my job. If there's a problem with the way I'm doing my job, it's coming from the board of the Library Action Committee. So,
Sure.
but he would get angry because I would do things and not ask his permission. So after a while, I said, "You don't understand. This is my job description," and I give him a copy of it. So what is it I'm doing that's not in this job description? My
Mhm.
job description was to promote the library, to evaluate the library, to manage the library, do all the other things that are part of being a manager. I didn't have to get permission to do that. So eventually he stopped writing me up because he knew I wasn't going to change.
Mhm. Well, I think that's a very brave thing, and it also says a lot about that every kind of moment of that leadership, first leadership role in that capacity was in a way like stating the ground and experience that you had to offer, but also validating the reason why you had to be there or why you should be there. So thank you. So you've spoken about the role of African-centered librarianship specifically. How can libraries incorporate these perspectives without tokenizing Black culture in both like pedagogy, information science, lectures, I guess the culture and community that speaks about Black culture and often by not Black folks talking about Black culture?
Yeah. I think one is, I think it's part of our responsibility is to expose our communities to new information, um, new cultural experiences. And I think I'm getting more of that now than I've gotten even before I retired. I still do a lot of outreach. I still do a lot of lectures on Black history and Black culture. Um, and over the last year and a half, 2 years, I've gotten more invitations to come out to Long Island, Nassau and Suffolk County, and do lectures on Black history, whether it's Juneteenth, whether it's Black History Month, or whether it's just on librarianship, but come out to
Mm-hmm.
Long Island and do presentations in communities that are monocultural, where the secondary cultures are maybe 5% of the total culture of that community.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember doing a lecture last year on Black history, and the entire audience of maybe 25, 30 people were all white women. So when I sat there and saw these people coming in, I said, "Oh, this is really going to be interesting." But I don't change my approach to teaching Black studies, no matter what the
Mm-hmm.
culture. So I did the
Mm-hmm.
presentations. As I'm doing the presentations and I'm citing different sources and using different references, they're sitting there shaking their heads. And I've learned how to read audiences when I'm speaking to them. So I'm reading the audience and seeing what they're accepting of what I'm talking about because of the
Mm-hmm.
way I'm presenting it, the validation of the information, the sources that I'm using. And at the end, the Q&A was so interactive that I was just so elated of that
Mm-hmm.
experience. And I've that
Yeah,
same
sure.
experience over several times. I still have lectures I have a schedule that already has me doing a Juneteenth presentation out in Suffolk County next year.
Wow.
So whatever it is about my style or my presentations, and it may be that they don't have enough people who go out and talk about Black history and Black culture in libraries in Long Island, but I'm willing to go out there and speak, and I'm comfortable. So I have no problem with that. And I think it comes from the fact that what I've learned about Black history and culture, the work that I've done, my role as a professor of Black studies now. I'm still a student of Black studies. I don't see myself as a scholar, so I'm always
Mm-hmm.
willing to learn. This library you see behind me is only part of my home library. There's another floor to ceiling shelf to my left and one over to the right behind me. And there's books downstairs that are in my library downstairs. So whenever I need information, I also learned that you can't always lie in the library being open when you need information with the writing that I
Mm-hmm.
do, research that I do. So I've built up my own library.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm hoping that when my day comes, it's time for me to make that transition, this collection will be donated to a library in New York City.
Oh, that's beautiful. Um, and I think it says a lot about, I guess, the significance of more and more libraries asking for more and more voices to be heard, whether in a lecture series or an ongoing, and I recommend ongoing conversation with various communities
Right.
that exist simultaneously, if not equally, within the world that is this
Yeah.
world.
Yeah. And I think especially with the climate that we have in this country today, it is more important for open lines of communication to take place. Change can't take place without communication. You can't take down barriers and knock down doors without communication about what it is you're trying to share. And I think that's what I'm trying to do. I'm sharing information that came to me and throughout the tenure of learning and teaching and research and writing. But there's a YouTube video entitled "The Danger of the Single Story" by a
Mhm.
Nigerian author, Chimamanda Adichie. The Danger of the Single Story. It's about 20 minutes long. and she speaks about her role as a writer, as a child, only reading books written by white people and about white communities, about white culture. And it's the same that most of us had growing up. There were no books about Black history. There were no books about the Black people wrote, at least that we had could get our hands on.
Right.
So when we looked at those books and we looked at the history classes that we had in school, we didn't see ourselves in those classes. We didn't see our books ourselves in that history, in those books. Carter G. Woodson talked about it. W.B. Du Bois talked about it. John Henry Clark talked about it. And a number of historians have talked about the fact that they started getting involved in learning and teaching Black studies because there was none when they were going to school. And they knew that and I used to ask questions in elementary and middle school. Isn't there anything we did besides being slaves?
Mm.
And teachers would say, you didn't do anything in history. You're a product of history. And I could never accept that. We have to have done something. The teachers couldn't teach it because they weren't taught it either. So the danger of the single story is it establishes stereotypes and leads to incomplete stories. And that's what the history that we learn in school is, incomplete stories. So teaching Black studies is to teach them a chapter of American history from the time that we came here in the 1400s, not even the 1600s, the 1400s to today, that is from our perspective. It isn't always negative. It's mostly positive. Look at all the things that we've contributed to American history, to to librarianship, to culture, to the whatever America is. America wouldn't be what it is if it had not been for Black history and Black culture and the contributions of Black people. It couldn't have been. Thousands of inventions. Our role in every concept, every aspect of life, we've had a role in. We couldn't have this lecture if it wasn't for a Black man that invented the plasma screen for the computer. So if you're teaching us, and that's one of the flaws of having a monocultural community, only having books from their community and nobody else, that's a single story. And that's dangerous because when they walk outside that library, the world is a multicultural place. America is a multicultural place. You can't divorce the real history of this country and say this is the only history. It's not the only history. It's never the only history. So libraries need to have a well-rounded collection for exposure first, and then for knowledge and edification and learning, so that the role of the library having access to information, not some information, not specific information, not designated information, access to information. And that's what we do. And that's even why I teach Black Studies today.
No, thank you for that. I think you also quickly, just to add, bring up a really salient point about the fact that there is a life cycle to even how we are educated as librarians to then go off and out into the world and go within the ecosystems that we then land in within our respective libraries that many of us spend our entire careers within. And so, in the same way that you've mentioned, as children, as teens, having the option of only one story. So too, if we're not challenged within our master's program or as a part of CEU to have more than one story, that's an ongoing part of our career and orientation and continued leadership, then that creates a continued silo of only one voice. So I think what you really bring up is an important part of how we even understand how information seeking behavior needs to account for more than one voice, and how it is that we even understand information to be sought. So thank you. The last question, I promise, is if you could create a national program to support underserved libraries today, which is every single library today, thanks to what is happening today, what would it look like and who would it prioritize?
It would be a reflection of what I just spoke about. Having libraries as diverse cultural institutions, all of them, um, representing all the cultures of that community, whether it's on a college campus or a high school or a middle school, elementary school, whether it's a public library or a special library. represent the culture of your community. And the community is depending on where your outreach begins and ends. Having the voice of that community represented in the library that serves them. They should not just be the external customers. They should be connected to the internal customers who are the staff, the administrators, the trustees, the presidents and CEOs. Excuse me. And having a voice for what needs to change or what they would like to see out of that library. There's got to be that ongoing cycle of to and fro from the customer
Yeah.
to the library, and then have the full cultural scope of the library and the profession and the community represented on the staff of the library. I think
Yeah.
that's one of the things that we still haven't gotten to is where we don't know how to do recruitment well enough, where we are recruiting enough people to come into the library's profession from different cultures. And I think that part of that is our fault because we do not do an excellent job or a good enough job at introducing ourselves to the community as a profession. I started doing part of my outreach at Langston Hughes was going to the schools and participating in career days, National Poetry Month, National Library Month, Black History Month. There was always this outreach to the community representing the profession. I didn't just represent Langston Hughes Library, the work I did at Langston Hughes Library. I used to talk about the scope of the profession, including what I did as part of the profession. So students would be introduced. I did a career day at a daycare program. There were like 1 to 2 year olds, 3 year olds, and of course they had no idea what I was, but they were introduced to the books and the children's books and reading as this is what I do as a profession. Wow, you read books for library. You have books, and they open their eyes to the possibilities and all of the things that we do with elementary school grades. We need to go out and talk to elementary school grades of being librarians, not just doctors and lawyers and basketball players and concert singers. Or what about being a librarian? Why don't you introduce that? That's our fault. We have not done that as a profession. And we need to up our requirements, up our game, and start doing ongoing outreach to all of the grades. Don't wait till they're in high school. Don't wait till they're in college. Going to get them before they get out of high school, elementary school, middle school, and high school, and introduce librarianship as a viable profession. How many of our people in
Yeah.
our profession have actually become part of the profession because they worked in the library?
Mm-hmm.
They volunteered. They were tutors. They worked in the summer program. This was their first job. That's fine. Those are the ones that are coming out of high school. What about the ones that are in elementary and middle school? How do you get them into the library? And we also have done we've corrected this over time, but I'd say within the last probably maybe less than 20 years, we have finally realized that we had great children librarians and children's programs. We had great adult programs and adult librarians programs, but we were leaving out the middle school, the
Mm-hmm.
the 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 school, the teenagers, the tweens and teens. They're now libraries are starting to realize it's just important, maybe more important, to have a great teen tween program in your library as it was to have children. Because we lost a lot of people in the library
Yeah.
who didn't know how to act in the library. We put them out the library. We banned them
Mm-hmm.
from libraries because of the way they acted, the way they talked, and then we expect them to come back to the library when they get out of high school. A lot of
Yeah.
them don't come back until they have children,
Right.
and then they bring their children to the library.
Right.
So we've got to evaluate ourselves and examine ourselves and what we do and the impact we have on our communities by not practicing our own concept of quality customer service.
No, that I mean, I think you also bring up a really important point that I know for me personally, the phrase underserved has so many historical concepts behind that phrase. And I think what information science and librarianship can do is reclaim that word as coming from a professional lens as who are we not serving in our
Right.
profession to this
Right.
community? So who's
Yeah.
missing from staff? Who are we underserving as the profession to every library that we meet, that we work in? And I
Right.
think that's like it, what you're speaking to, and really reframing it as something that is intentional and also very much something we have agency as a profession over.
And it's not just the underserved, it's the unserved. So
Yes.
those people that walk by our libraries every day and never walk in the door are unserved. How do you get those people into the library? There are unserved communities that still need to be served. And if you
Right.
are part of a monocultural society like Suffolk County is, parts of Nassau County are, and you don't serve those non-speaking English people, those people who are non-European culture in their community, but they live in your neighborhood, then you're not fulfilling your role as a library.
And thus being underserved. Yeah. No, thank you so much for taking the time today to still have a cold and hang out with me in what is the beginning of a series that I'm starting on behalf of the New York Library Black Caucus. And hopefully it will become something nationally called In Our Own Words. Today was Tuesday, October 14th. My name is Tova Harris. I had the absolute pleasure and privilege of speaking with you today, Andrew. And I think the courage of what it means to come this far in the profession and to still keep advocating and still keep fighting for all of our voices to be heard really says a lot about you and the work and the love and care and intention you've brought to this trajectory of love. What it
Thank you.
sounds like.
Thank you. I think
Yeah.
if I have a last one phrase to last, is the opening line of a poem that I cite whenever I do speaking engagement. If you cannot be the best for yourself, do it for those who are denied the opportunity to be the best.
Oof, goosebumps. All right. Thank you so much. And we
Quite
look
welcome.
forward to honoring you at this year's New York Library Association's conference in Saratoga Springs. I will be sure to include as much content as I can from this recorded session. And we do encourage anyone who is watching this or who will be watching it to know that New York Library Black Caucus is an ongoing part of the New York Library Association and something very much to get connected with. Is an ongoing way and alliance of community and serving, let's say, underserved Black librarianship in New York and America. All right.
I'm so
Thank you
honored.
so much.
So I'm so honored to be part of the selection of four African
Yes.
American past presidents of the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. That is so special. You have no idea.
Mhm. Well, thank you so much for your time today, and we look
Thank
forward
you.
to seeing you at the conference.
Thank you. And I hope not to have a cold when I get there.
I hope so too. I hope so too.